Welcome everybody to online classes. Miss you guys. I didn't get to see you in the last week because I was feeling a little under the weather, but I am back. You might hear some sniffles in my nose. So, we're picking up in the story right after Moses crosses the Red Sea and they're going to the Promised Land. And you might have read with the sub that when Moses gets to the Promised Land, he gets right to the edge, but he dies actually before he makes it into the Promised Land. So Moses doesn't even get into the place that he was headed and leading the Israelites. But it's okay because he's got a guy named Joshua. And we can see Joshua here in this picture. And Joshua has the goal of getting into the Promised Land by any means necessary. And you can see here he's all geared up to do that. He is pointing towards the Promised Land like saying, let's go over there, guys. That's where we got to go. And he's got his helmet on, and he's got his shield and his armor and his sword, and he is geared up because he's going to get into that Promised Land no matter what. And you can see he's got a halo around his head in this image to signify that he is indeed a holy warrior. And we're going to talk about what that means in this PowerPoint. And a little later in the second half, we'll talk about people called judges. And here is an example of some judges. Again, if you look at them, they are geared up and ready to go. They got swords. They got shofars, which are these horns of war. They're blowing into the horns, and they are ready to get into the Promised Land no matter what. All right, let's do this thing. So the book of Joshua comes right after the end of the Torah, or the Pentateuch, or the books of law. The first 5 books of the Bible finish, and the very next book is the book of Joshua. And it starts a brand new section called the historical books. So we're done with the Torah, and we're into this next section of the Bible, which is the historical books. And the historical books are exactly what they sound like. They're the history of the Israelite people. And this history is written in a very epic way. It is not super concerned with factual accuracy. Rather, it's embellished and expanded to show the power of God, the power of the Israelites. So it's very much an epic retelling of the history of the Israelites. And what's in the book of Joshua? Well, it's actually super simple. It's broken up like this. In the first half, chapters 2 through 12, it's all about Joshua entering the land with his troops. It's all about how he conquers the Promised Land. So if you read chapters 2 through 12, it's all about the war and the battles and the struggles they have to do to fight to get into the Promised Land. And once they do, chapters 13 through 22, it's about them dividing up the land. So once Joshua and his Israelite troops are successful in getting into the Promised Land, well, then they got to start divvying it up. And they got 12 tribes to divvy it up amongst. So they go, okay, you guys, you're going to get that part of the land. You guys are going to get that part of the land. And so chapters 13 through 22 describe how they divide it up. And then like any good war story, the book begins and ends with epic speeches. So Joshua is giving speeches in chapter 1, which, if you're going to send troops into battle, you got to give an epic speech. So Joshua is rallying the troops. He's talking about the power of God. He's talking about how nothing can get in their way as long as they follow the 10 Commandments. It's this really epic speech in chapter 1. And then the book ends, because chapter 24 is the last chapter. It ends with another epic speech where Joshua's like, we did it. The power of God is super clear. He led us here. He made us victorious. God is awesome. Hooray. It's an epic speech. So when you look at it from this way, it's a really simple breakdown. Chapter 1, Joshua gives an epic speech. They go to war and they win in the first, chapters 2 through 12. They divide up the land, another epic speech, and the book of Joshua is done. It's a super easy, easily laid out structure in the book of Joshua. Here's our boy Joshua again, geared up. For those of you playing at home, keeping track, we're about 1,200 years before Christ right now. This is about 1,200 years before Jesus in 1200 BC. And this guy Joshua, he's described in the Bible as being the son of Nun, which is the name of his father. Now, we don't know a lot about Nun, but if we were making educated guesses as to who Nun was or what he did, we could probably make some good guesses. We might think, he might have been Joshua's father, I don't know what, like a king or a priest or maybe a warrior himself. Think about it. What would Joshua's father have been? Probably If you said slave, you're very smart. Because they were in Egypt. Joshua is just an ex-slave. all these Israelites are ex-slaves that Moses led out of Egypt. So these guys were not epic warriors, they're just escaped slaves. And Joshua's very name means God saves, which is kind of interesting because it's the same kind of name, the same derivation of the name Jesus or Isaiah. Now, when we say Jesus, we're speaking English. The name Jesus is English. If we say it in Spanish, it's Jesus. But if we would say the name Jesus in Jesus's original language of Aramaic, it would sound more like Yeshua. And Yeshua and Joshua are very similar names. So the little fun fact here is that the name Joshua is just a variation of the name Jesus, meaning God saves. It's like if your name was Robert and they called you Bob or Bobby. It's the same type of name, it's just a variation. So Joshua and Jesus both mean God saves. It's a derivation of the name Yeshua. And of course, Joshua is Moses' successor, which simply means that when Moses died, Joshua took his place. Joshua was much younger than Moses, and so he takes his place to finish what Moses started, to lead the Israelites into the promised land. All right, let's see. So what's the role of Joshua? Boop. He leads the Israelites into the promised land, which is called Canaan, and he's going to conquer it. He's going to get into the land of Canaan, into the promised land by any means necessary. Now, shocking, the land of Canaan has people in it already, and they are called Canaanites. Yeah, the land of Canaan has Canaanites living there. And the Canaanites who already live in that land are polytheistic. Now, the Israelites are monotheistic. Mono meaning one, theistic meaning God. So the Israelites, of course, we know the Israelites, they believe in one God, Yahweh, right? I am who I am. And so when they get to the Canaanites, they're polytheistic. They have many, 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 many gods. And so there's a conflict here. And so the Canaanites, when they see the Israelites on their doorstep, shockingly, they refuse to hand over the land to the Israelites, right? They're not going to just let them waltz into their land. So here's the situation. We got the Israelites who want to go into the promised land, and the people who live in the promised land already who are polytheistic, who don't want them to come in. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? If you said war, you're absolutely correct. And this is going to be a holy war, which sounds like contradictory terms. How can it be holy and a war at the same time? We're going to explore that here. So a war, in this sense, is a holy act providing security for the people who are waging the war because they're confident that God is on their side. So the Israelites here are thinking to themselves, okay, well, we're headed into the promised land, which God told us to do, so we're probably going to be okay because, well, God is on our side. And they're fulfilling the promise made to the patriarchs. Remember what God told Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, like 500 years before this. He said, I will take you to a land, the land and have descendants as numerous as the stars. So Joshua and the Israelites are confident that they're fulfilling the covenant. So if they're confident that they're fulfilling the covenant that God made, then they're going to be very confident in what they do because they say, well, God told us to do this, so we're going to be okay. So when you read this book of Joshua, especially in the conquest of the land, those 2nd through 12th chapters, you're going to see a lot of violence. And as I already said many times, that there's lots of different books in the Bible in lots of different writing styles. And so this one is going to be very violent. And here we see a violent picture of people going to war. And God tells Joshua in the book of Joshua that when you get into the land of Jericho, that last city that's blocking you from the promised land, you have to put the band. The band, B-A-N. What's the band? Well, the band is a synonym for a holy war. And what it means is that God wants the Israelites to sacrifice all the spoils of war to God, killing all life, animal and human. Now let's pause here, and this will be the end of this first video, and we'll think. God wants them to wipe out the city, the last thing that's blocking them from the promised land, and destroy everything. Sacrifice all the spoils of war and kill everyone and everything inside, which is pretty heavy. So let's have this final thought here. In this time, if you were to conquer a city, you would get the spoils of war. Well, what does that mean? If you take your army into a city and you beat that city, everything in it becomes yours. Let's say you find some food in that city that you just conquered. Well, what do you do with that food? Well, you're going to give it to your troops, right? Because they're hungry. So you say, thank you for your food. Your food is now our food. And let's say you're rummaging through that city and you find stockpiles of gold. Well, now that's your gold because you just beat the city. So you're like, thank you very much for that gold. We will be taking that now. And what about all the people in that city? Well, you go, hey, you guys can work. Why don't you become our slaves? So conquering a city as an army at this time would have been for the purposes of getting the spoils of war, the food and the money and even the people in the city to strengthen your own army. And so you would take all that stuff for you. But in this instance, God says, don't do any of that stuff. Rather, destroy everything and don't keep it for yourself. Which means if you find food in that city and you're an Israelite, you don't get to eat that food. You have to destroy it. Let's say you find money in that city of Jericho. You don't get to keep it. You have to destroy it. Even the people, you can't take them for yourselves to make them work for you or make them your soldiers or make them your slaves. You have to kill them. Now that's a super heavy thing, but what's the deeper message here being told to the Israelites? The deeper message is the reason you're putting the ban, the reason you're going to the promised land is not for the spoils of war. It's not to get the things that war gives, the money and the power and the slaves. You're doing this for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to fulfill the covenant. So in its own weird way, and we'll have to wrestle with this, is the ban, the wiping out of all life is not, it seems really heavy, and it is, but think of the deeper meaning. It's to show that the Israelites are doing this for God and for God only and not for any self-serving reasons. All right, we're going to cut it off right there, and I'll see you in part 2.